The mask to stay and test to play options that we're announcing today are informed by a growing body of national experience, as well as by the pilot I referenced in Warren County and experience shared by other local health departments, all pointing toward a low number of direct contacts that convert to cases within school settings. Our proposed changes, the changes that we're actually announcing today, incorporate mask wearing and testing to reduce the chance of spread of COVID-19 and to provide a safe alternative to out-of-school quarantine. Now, when we talk about quarantine, we often refer to direct contacts. These direct contacts are the individuals who were directly exposed to COVID-19 by someone who is known to be a positive case. Remember, COVID-19 is a respiratory virus. It doesn't require physical contact to spread. It spread through sneezing, coughing, talking, breathing. These factors need to be considered when determining the level of exposure and who is a direct contact. Now, the first new option we're offering is called Mask to Stay, and it applies to participation in the classroom following a COVID-19 exposure in a school setting or another school-related activity. Direct contacts, regardless of vaccination or masking status, may remain in the classroom environment if they do the following. First, wear a mask for 14 days after their last date of exposure. Second, self-monitor or parent monitor for symptoms of COVID-19. Third, isolate and get tested if they start to experience symptoms associated with COVID-19. And that would be regardless of the severity of those symptoms. And fourth, consistent with guidance for others quarantining in low-risk environments, students and staff may discontinue these quarantine procedures after 7 days if they meet two basic criteria. First, they don't develop any symptoms. And second, they test negative between days 5 and 7. This is the so-called 7-day quarantine option that has been in place for a very long time. While parents and students are responsible for symptom monitoring under this guidance, if a school staff member or school nurse sees a child exhibiting symptoms, they should, of course, act accordingly. The second option, which we're calling Test to Play, applies to participation in extracurricular activities following exposure in the classroom or the school-related environment. Asymptomatic contacts may continue to participate in extracurricular activities if they, first, wear a mask when able. This includes wearing a mask during transportation, like traveling on a team bus, traveling to and from the game, while in a locker room, while sitting or standing on the sideline, anytime that they can reasonably wear a mask. Anytime that the mask won't interfere with breathing, the activity that they're engaging in, or create a safety hazard. Secondly, we ask them to test on initial notification of exposure to COVID-19. So right away, once they've been advised that they have had a direct contact. And then third, test again, sometime between days 5 and 7 following that initial exposure. Now, if they're negative at that time, between days 5 and 7, they of course qualify to test out of quarantine after day 7 and can resume normal activities. I want to point out that the tests can be either a PCR or an antigen test, but they should be proctored or observed. They can't be an over-the-counter test that's entirely self-administered and not proctored. Now, when it comes to test to play, school districts should consider same-day testing for athletic competitions where there's a potential of school-to-school exposure. We're sharing these updated quarantine guidelines with school districts across the state and local health departments today, and they can begin modifying quarantine based on these recommendations immediately. As a reminder, those who consistently wear masks in school and those who are fully vaccinated can already remain in the classroom if they're exposed to COVID-19 in a school setting. I also want to emphasize that vaccination remains our best protection. Nevertheless, the updated quarantine guidelines we're sharing today will allow for as much in-school learning as possible, even as we continue our effort to battle COVID-19. And with that, Alicia, I think that we can open up for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Vanderhoff. Our first question today is from Allison Walker with WKEF in
Hello, Dr. Vanderhoff. Thanks so much for taking the time today. So did you decide to update guidance in part due to the expectation that many 5 to 11-year-olds will get vaccinated after Pfizer's approval? And if vaccine uptake isn't as widespread as you expect, and this updated guidance leads to a series of outbreaks in schools, will you tighten quarantine guidance again?
That's an excellent question. First, let me begin with the anticipated vaccination of those 5 to 11. We're actually very excited about the availability of that in the not too distant future. We're of course optimistic that the ACIP and the FDA Advisory Committee will both give the green light and that we'll be able to offer this vaccination to that age group very soon. Without repeating a lot of what I said, I do want to underline just how impactful these vaccines have been. I mean, the simple fact is that vaccinated students are, by and large, not the students who are ending up hospitalized. They're not ending up with the tragic cases that we're seeing of multi-system inflammatory syndrome of children. So it's our best protection. We think that it's a wonderful step that we're about to take, and we'd encourage parents to get out there and vaccinate. But this updated quarantine guidance actually is informed by ongoing evaluation of numbers on the ground and the clear evidence that the school environment has been structured by our schools in such a way that with masking, we have demonstrated again that there is a very low risk of a contact who develops COVID-19 then transmitting that on to other students. And so it's the evidence on the ground that has given us confidence to offer this alternative to out-of-school quarantine to our school districts who want to take advantage of it, and really speaks to the impact of masking and the structured environment that creates distancing and good ventilation that so many of our schools have been able to achieve.
Thank you, Dr. Vanderhoff. Our next question is from Joe Ingalls with Ohio Public Radio and Television.
Yes, good morning. Joe, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, I can.
We can hear you now.
Okay, sorry about that. It helps when you unmute something, you know. So my question is, we are hearing a lot of confusion about how the J&J vaccine is being monitored. There seems to be some confusion. People who got it back in the spring and are, 2 months or more out of it, the CDC says everyone is supposed to get a booster then. But I've heard from a J&J recipient who got the shot last spring, tried to get a booster Friday, was turned away. And some J&J people are wondering if they can get a full dose of Moderna instead of a half dose booster, since they don't have the same level of protection as those who got the mRNA vaccines in the first place. Can you set all of this straight?
Sure. It's an understandable set of questions, and I'm grateful that you're asking it. With all of these vaccines, because they're new vaccines and not only new vaccines, but vaccines against a new virus, it has been necessary for us to go where the facts lead us. And over time, we've been able to monitor closely and make determinations about how the vaccines seem to be doing in terms of maintaining protection and immunity, et cetera. And there has been for a long time consideration of the potential need for a booster. And, you know, we have boosters for a whole host of vaccines that is just a standard part of the guidance for those vaccines. It has become clear from the data that those who have received Johnson & Johnson, well, they have developed a very good initial response, do get benefit from a booster vaccine. It's also clear, though, that what vaccine they receive a booster with, it's clearer now than it was many months ago that they have a lot of options, because we have 3 good vaccines on the market, and there is now allowance based on the data and safety data for those J&J recipients to choose to get one of the mRNA vaccines as a booster. However, they really do need to get the appropriate booster. So with the Moderna vaccine, it turns out with that vaccine, which has a slightly different concentration, a slightly different formulation to the vaccine by Pfizer BioNTech, that they need the booster version of the vaccine as opposed to the primary vaccine that people may have started their Moderna vaccination with. So there's a booster dosage. That's the one that the folks who may have gotten J&J may be choosing an mRNA vaccine as a booster. That's the one they should be pursuing. So all in all, it's very good news in that there's flexibility for people, and there appears to be some actual benefit to beginning with the one kind of vaccine, the J&J, and then moving to one of the mRNA vaccines.
And all J&J recipients are eligible for a booster, correct?
So the J&J guidance was very specific. I'd have to actually turn to the guidance to review that for you. We'll do that and get that information to you.
Thank you, Dr. Vanderhoff. Our next question comes from Jackie Borchert at USA Today Network, Ohio.
Good morning. I was wondering if you could go over just real quickly when a coronavirus test would be required in school versus for extracurricular activities, and is the state providing those tests to the schools that choose to adopt this protocol?
Yeah. So we had the benefit of looking at data that came to us from our pilot in Warren County. And it was very instructive because we began that pilot with both the testing and the masking of students. And because it became very, very clear that there was just a very low rate of conversion of individuals who were identified as having had a direct contact and going on to become cases and very low risk of transmission, provided they were masked, we were able to make the recommendation that we brought forth today, that for the mask to stay group, the group who are looking at returning to or remaining in the classroom, it is masking that is the important step. So we'd ask them to mask for 14 days. The only testing that would be needed for that group would be if they chose to get a test between days 5 and 7 with an eye towards concluding their quarantine after day 7. And that's the same 7-day off-ramp that would be available for anyone in quarantine today in a low-risk environment. So that's what we're looking at there. The test to play option involves, of course, the testing at 2 points, the very start and then between days 5 and 7, and that is for those participating in extracurriculars. The reason for that is because we recognize that there are simply times in many extracurriculars, not all, but in many, where there is less ability to mask and or less ability to maintain consistent distancing. And so we add the additional layer of protection of that testing at 2 intervals. Now, we recognize that testing, especially testing that is proctored, can be a bit more challenging. Now, people, of course, still have the option of going to a local health department, of going to their health provider, going in some circumstances to many of our pharmacies and having a proctored test or a PCR test. But in addition, we have been supplying the proctored tests that can be made available to the students through a number of our local health departments, and students and schools can take advantage of that, as well as working with some of our educational partners to support schools in gaining access to those tests. So we're working very hard to assure that testing is not an impediment to those who are participating in test to play being able to follow this as a pathway.
Thank you, Dr. Vanderhoff. Our next question is from Noah Blundo with.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Noah. You might need to speak up.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, you mentioned expecting shipments of the vaccine when it's potentially authorized for the younger age group. And I just wanted you to clarify, is it actually a different packaging or formulation, or can people just start, putting the smaller doses in the syringes?
Yeah, no. So the vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine for ages 5 through 11 is actually a different formulation of the vaccine. So it's not as simple as, we'll dilute the adult dose down. So it will be a dedicated 5 to 11-year-old pediatric dose of the Pfizer vaccine, and it will be packaged and delivered to providers in that manner. So we're working right now with our various providers and the supply chain that feeds them with vaccines, so that everyone is in a good position and ready to go when this 5 to 11-year-old vaccine becomes available. They are not interchangeable. So this is actually now the first time that we have a different formulation of the vaccine, different concentrations, et cetera. This is a true pediatric vaccine formulation.
Thank you, Dr. Vanderhoff. Our next question comes from Lindsay Mills with WBNS 10.
Good afternoon, and thanks for taking my question. As it pertains also to the Pfizer 5 to 11 vaccine, is there a limit to how many doses providers can request at this time? And if so, how is that limit determined?
So what we've been doing is working with our providers to identify their readiness as well as their requests, and then working with our federal partners to distribute that in a timely and effective way. We don't actually know yet what our state allocation will be, but our early indications suggest to us that at least the providers who are preparing for the initial rollout of this are ready to go, and we're ready to provide them with that vaccine to facilitate that distribution. But it's premature really for us to be able to answer questions about specific state allocations or individual allocations.
Thank you, Dr. Vanderhoff. Our next question is from Tom Bosco with WSYX WTT.
Hello.
Hi, Dr. Vanderhoff. I had to unmute there. So can you explain, these are guidelines. Each district will have to adopt them. Is that correct? These are not mandatory at this point for those schools. Can you talk about that process a little bit?
Yes, that's correct. So indeed, all of our quarantine guidance currently is guidance. It's guidance that the state has offered after careful consideration of available data and offered to the state as a pathway endorsed by the Ohio Department of Health. However, we're a local state, and the actual authority to carry that out rests locally with our local health departments and working with their academic partners.
Thank you, Dr. Vanderhoff. Our next question is from Megan Mitchell with WLW.
Hey, doctor. Yeah, I also wanted to follow up on the Pfizer vaccine and what those conversations will look like if that does get approved within the next 2 weeks, and where this policy might go if and when 5 and 11-year-olds do get that go ahead.
Yeah, so what I would anticipate, what my hope would be, is that as more and more of our 5 to 11-year-old students become vaccinated and develop complete immunity, robust immunity, we will see less and less instances of students developing COVID-19, of students being in a situation where they have been determined to have been exposed in an unprotected way to COVID-19. Remember today, for those who are masked or those who are fully vaccinated, they're already in a position of not being subject to out-of-school quarantine. And so as more and more of our 5 to 11-year-olds who today are not eligible for vaccine become eligible and receive the vaccine, this additional guidance we're offering today becomes less and less relevant. But in our current classroom situation, it's very relevant, particularly for those less than 12. So my hope actually is that we'll see a robust response that parents take to vaccination, and that high level of vaccination will make today's guidance irrelevant. But to the extent that we continue to have unvaccinated and unmasked students who have exposures, I think what's important here is that we've identified a safe pathway for assuring that our students can remain safe, remain protected, and yet not be deprived of in-school instruction, which we've learned during the course of this pandemic is so important.
Thank you.
Dr. Vanderhoff, our final question today is from Katie Ellington at the Richland.
Hi, Dr. Vanderhoff. Thank you so much. So I wanted to ask, why does this guidance only apply to school-related exposures?
Well, that's a great question. And it has to do with data and information that we have available to us. It is very, very clear, dating all the way back to the Ohio schools COVID evaluation, and now more recently in the data that we're seeing reported nationally, including in some pre-prints, as well as in the Warren County experience during our pilot, that students in the school environment, particularly when they are masked, have a very low risk of transmitting the virus or of acquiring the virus. It is because we are looking at an environment that we understand well, that is a controlled environment, and therefore has a higher level of safety than we know, looking at statewide data, exists outside of school. In fact, most of the cases and most of the transmission that appears to be happening in our pediatric age group appears to be happening outside school, happening when they are out and about and involved in non-school and non-school related activities. So that's the reason that we can safely offer this masked alternative for our students to continue in classroom learning and cannot as confidently apply it in other settings.
Thank you so much.
And Dr. Vanderhoff, that was our final question for the day. If you'd like to share any final closing remarks.
Now, thank you all again. I think this is an important step on our path to assuring the developmental needs of our K through 12 students are met, even as we work hard to protect them and their families and loved ones from the risk of COVID-19. So I think it's a very important development. I'm very grateful for the many who have contributed to our body of knowledge that has gotten us here, especially to those in Warren County, both on the educational and local health department side, as well as to our many other educational and health department partners who've contributed other important information and feedback as we developed these guidelines. So many thanks to them. And as a result of their substantial input, I feel very confident that these additional guidelines will be helpful and will provide us with a very effective tool for ensuring the development in a safe environment of our children.